Welcome to the Eclectic Thrifter and Crafter, where we thrift and craft with purpose. It's Tea Tuesday. Or in my world, Crafty Tuesday. Pour yourself a cup of tea and let's get into a new project today. For our project today, we're going to revisit the doll furniture I purchased at a flea market 2 weeks ago. Using the book, The Decorated Dollhouse by Jessica Ridley, we're going to do the marbling process on the top surface of the little dresser, as well as the table that I shared last week that I was going to cut in half. I've pre-prepared all the surfaces with a semi-gloss paint. This is the little mirror that I cut off of the bureau. Cut the top of it off. We're going to set that aside for another project. We are going to gold leaf this frame when we're done marbling the tops of this bureau and the little tables. This little screen is from the original box of discarded doll furniture. It is broken. We're going to repair it, and it's going to be turned into an Asian screen, and that'll be a project for another day. All right, let's get started. So these are the colors we're going to be using. I'm going to list them right here. We're going to be using Payne's Gray as a foundation. It's going to make a nice little gray glaze. We're going to use raw umber, burnt sienna, burnt umber, and titanium white, and then black. I'm using oils. Now I did try this with watercolors. The watercolors dry too fast, so I selected to use oils. I'm going to be using with the oils turpenoid. You're going to need that to help mix the paints. I have a little bit of turpenoid in my little dish, and I'm going to use a saucer. I've discovered that using a saucer is much nicer than using the plastic paint palettes because the paint just sticks to the palettes, and I like to have a clean surface. So we're going to begin with this gray glaze. With a little dab of turpenoid, it makes a very nice little glaze. I've protected the wood finish because I didn't want to paint it black. I want to try and preserve that beautiful finish. Even though it is not inexpensive doll furniture, it's made in China, but it was made very well, and the stain was very pretty. I'm going to do my best to try and match that stain on the other tables, but I really did not want to paint it black. I do have a black dining room, but I didn't want to carry it into the hallways. I did make 2 attempts at this. The one you're going to see is, this is the first attempt. I did a second attempt after this was filmed, full disclosure, and it's because I smudged it and I had to redo it. But it's a learning process. I've never done this before, and it turned out to be not as difficult as I imagined it would be. It did take a little bit of practice to get that feather to fiddle across the surface properly, but I dabbed it in between layers, and I think it turned out okay for my first time. I don't want to make the gray glaze too dark, just enough so it gives a bit of a background. I'm just going to give this one just a little more gray glaze. I am following along the instructions, so we're going to turn the page and move on to our next step because we've completed our glaze. Now that little tiny table to the right, you're not going to see today because I'm going to sand it down. It had a very rough surface. It's very inexpensive wood. I'm going to take my towel and I'm going to dab the surface to give it a little bit of a texture to start. I'm using a cotton tea towel. The acrylic and the watercolor dried way too fast to do this properly, so I went to Joann's. I had a 40% off coupon. I bought a set of oils because I'd been planning on doing that for a while. I used my 40% off coupon to purchase the Turpenoid. This table was particularly rough. I'm just going to give it a glaze, but you're not going to see it at the end. And I found out that it was mounted crooked, so I'm going to have to fix that down the road in the garage. These cut very well. I didn't realize how thick that top was. And we're moving on to our next step in her instructions. If you have this book, you'll find these instructions. This is from her Chinese room, pages 18 to 21. There should be enough terps left on your palette for this next step. If not, just take a tip of your brush and put a few drops on your palette. Now we're going to prepare our palette with our paints. I'm going to add another dab of the Payne's Gray because I used up a lot of that glaze. I'm going to add a little dab of the terps on there. Then I'm going to add the raw umber. I started filming just after I arrived home from the store and have to open each one of these first. I'm going to do a little mixing before I draw my goose feather through the paint. I'm actually a little nervous about doing this because I did not practice this before filming. I wanted to show you exactly how easy or how difficult this process was going to be. I'm going to continue drawing my feather across the surface to build up layers of veining. Now I'm going to take my cloth and I'm going to dab it just a little bit to blur it so it's not so sharp. And then I'm going to keep layering. At this point, my top coat is going to be burnt sienna. For this next step, I'm going to take a nice stiff craft brush and I'm going to flick the paint across the surface of the table. This is going to give a dappled effect that you see in marble. Once again, I'm going to take my towel and I'm going to blur the dappling. I am content with my results so far. I'm going to take my feather and I'm going to give some darker veining on the top, working from light to dark. These little feathers I purchased at the craft store. I actually got these at Hobby Lobby with my friends the other day, and they worked out very well. I'm going to be able to keep the one feather and reuse it for other projects. A little more dappling I've added, and then I'm going to leave it here for this piece. My first attempt seemed to turn out okay. Smudging it and having to do it again, it only gave me practice. So now we're going to move on to the side tables. And we have stippled this side already, and we're going to give our final layer of burnt umber to give it the dark veining. And we're going to do the same with this little table. I decided to try using my fine brush for this to get a finer veining line, and it did work fine. I think between that little brush and the feather, it turned out very well. For the final layer on all the tables, I'm going to draw my feather and my brush across the surface using burnt sienna and raw umber. I think the color turned out very well for my first try. Having to do it a second time, it gave me a little more confidence in the process. Next, we're going to put the gold foil on the mirror and give it the finishing touches. Once these pieces are completely dry and refurbished, they're going to be used in the first floor front hallway. Once the foil has completely covered all the surfaces, I'm going to leave it to dry in front of a fan for 24 hours. Gently brush the foil away, and we have our beautiful gold mirror. Here I'm taking a little stiffer brush and I'm pressing down the edges ever so gently, and I'm going to run the side of the brush along the edges to sharpen them. My adhesive was a little clumpy, and so I'm just going to give it a nice smooth out. Lastly, we're going to replace the mirror and put a new backing on the frame. Well, this just about wraps up our project today. Thank you so much for joining me today for my first marbling project. Please like and subscribe. I do welcome your ideas and thoughts in the comments below, and tapping that like button and sharing a comment helps the YouTube algorithm share my channel. Please share my thrifting and crafting channel with your thrifting and crafting friends. Check us out on Instagram and tap that notification button for upcoming announcements of thrifts and crafts. But most of all, have a lovely, lovely day.